Like he mentioned, I am Matt Chambers, and I had the pleasure of actually starting an IAM program at Asurion. Previously, I was a directory architect there and kind of just was laying the foundation of some IAM stuff without really knowing that I was laying foundation for IAM, and then kind of we formalized it early last year. So we'll talk about exactly what we actually went through. So just really quick, when I actually say IAM at Asurion, it actually encompasses four things. Obviously, identity for both provisioning and attestation reviews. Authentication, we own all federated authentication, internal authentication, Kerberos, all of that. Our directory space, so obviously Active Directory is big, Open LDAP, and some of the other directory or identity stores that we actually have. And then right now, the bane of my existence, which is our PKI infrastructure, I own the back end of that as well. Just a little bit about Asurion. We are about 23,500 employees and contractors, but as you can see, we actually hire and fire over 18,000 of those same people a year. So just huge turnover. And that's because we run several large call centers. So one of the main driving factors for wanting to get formalized IAM and really automation around provisioning was exactly that. The actual being able to bring large swaths of people on in a streamlined, easy fashion. So where we were before we actually started the IAM process was we really didn't have any identity or access management per se. We really were driven from a directory perspective. It was, the Windows group owning Active Directory, they kind of ran what they felt was the best way. We are really an AD-centric shop, but when it came to other identities, it really didn't have anything to do with it. Our Linux group ran their own identities in an Open LDAP directory, and so they didn't talk to the Windows folks didn't talk to them, really didn't have any dedicated way of saying, okay, when we hired somebody, make sure that they have the right rights. When they left, we cleaned up behind them. And also when, user X migrated from role 1 to role 2 to role 3 to role 4 during their life cycle at the company, we just kind of added rights as we went and never got rid of them. So then when the new user came on board and that manager just said, copy what that guy has, then we've got two people that have all those rights, and so on and so forth. We're not a huge, complex environment. Well, we do have 20 Active Directory domains, about 18.4. Some of them are actually not trusted, so very dispersed environment. We had three separate and distinct user provisioning processes. One for the folks here in the United States, for our mobility division, one for our retail division, and then Asia did their own thing. And they were completely different. Internal applications were all coded individually to authenticate users in a different fashion. So troubleshooting and trying to streamline the authentication process was a nightmare. Probably just like everybody else, our OU structure was an absolute mess. It still is a mess. We'll start to tackle that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it is layer upon layer of failed organizational projects that would just go about halfway, then stop, and we never clean up, and then so on and so forth, and it's just history. And then manual rights reviews. Our security team had a dedicated group that would audit user rights. They used the extremely automated platform that was Excel, and we needed to actually get a better handle and a more automated way of doing user right reviews. So, what did we try to do in last year, 2014, in kind of the first year of our IAM program? We kicked it off officially in February. We formed a new team in April. And this is, jump ahead, but this is one of the things that I felt was really critical to make sure that we actually succeeded, was to actually have a dedicated group of engineers that were just focused on IAM. So when we pitched this, they did say yes. They said, hey, we'll give you 3 additional folks besides myself. I got 1. So we ended up with, at the start of this year, we're up to 3 now, but we are growing. So we wanted to have a very simplistic user provisioning process. 1, replace the 3 existing ones with 1 automated process utilizing a tool that we could track to make sure that it would actually work. So when I say simplistic, I really do mean simplistic. We wanted to, when a user was hired, create their account in the Active Directory that they needed to go in, make sure that they had an email mailbox created in the proper Exchange environment, because we do run 2, and enable them for link. And then that was it. That was the only goal that we had, and then hand it off to our help desk to actually give the rights to a user. We wanted to collapse Active Directory domains. As I mentioned, we had 20 of them. We wanted to start the process to see how many we could actually collapse. We actually collapsed 4. So that was a good start. But our overall end goal is to get down to 1. Don't know if we'll get there or not, but that's where we want to be. And then we wanted to implement self-service password reset and account management, basically allowing end users to be able to reset their own password, unlock their own accounts. That was probably our biggest success story last year. That eliminated roughly 25% of the calls that we actually had coming into our service desk or our help desk. We were able to actually streamline workforce planning, and we were actually able to shift people off a help desk and actually have them focus on other things. So we actually eliminated the need to hire additional people doing that. So what did we learn along the way? Include HR. It's really critical. You know, if you're coming from an IT perspective, you usually don't talk to your HR group all that much. You're going to want to be tied to the hip to them, especially if you're going to want to provision in an automated fashion based on their data. Also, it's key that they understand that you're going to automate off of their data, and they're not used to just changing data willy-nilly and not having any downstream effects. Case in point, we actually we have company codes inside of our HR database to identify where a user needs to actually go. We based logic on those company codes that provision a user into a specific Active Directory environment. We had code written specifically for those codes. If a user came in with a code that didn't exist in our system, or their user code changed after they were provisioned, we would deprovision that account because we said they didn't exist. Our HR department decided, hey, we're going to change the company code for every user in the Philippines one afternoon and not tell us. We deactivated every employee account in the Philippines in a matter of under an hour. So critical to make sure you talk with HR. C-level support is important. We were able to talk with upper level management, actually all the way up to our board through our CIO to actually, CIO and CSO, to actually get focus on this. And that's why we're able to get the dedicated team formed and our security resources actually to look at this and help us push this through. So it's actually critical to actually pitch this up and actually have them push it down from the top down. Accurate data is key. Like I mentioned before, you want to make sure you know the data that you're working with and make sure that any logic that you are building off of that data is communicated out to the group so they don't actually change things on you and you get unforeseen deactivations. Don't be afraid to take steps backwards along the process. We actually have stumbled along the way, and you want to make sure that your management knows that there is going to be stumbling blocks. This is a multi-year endeavor. You don't want them to say, hey, after your first problem 3 months out of the gate, no, we're stopping. This is actually in it for the long haul. We've been doing this for now a year and a half. We have at least 3 years to go to get this to where we want it to be. Like I mentioned before, dedicated team. We did have a choice when we actually did this to actually have a matrix team of a bunch of engineers reporting up to different teams, or actually dedicate them. We decided that a dedicated team was more important, so they would have focus and not get pulled in every way. Like I mentioned before, this is going to take time. Initial goal should be simple. Don't try to bite off more than you can chew. It's important to have a good foundation to build upon. And if you try to take on too much stuff right out of the gate, that foundation is not going to be as rock solid as it needs to be when you get going. And the last one, which we lived, is do not deploy a new IAM platform the same weekend as you deploy a brand new HR system. We actually rolled out our migrated from an on-prem PeopleSoft implementation to Workday in the cloud. The same weekend we went live with our new IAM platform off of the custom scripts and the new user provisioning. There was no sleep that weekend at all as we worked out bugs. For everybody involved. So where do we go next? What are we actually focusing on now that we actually got that foundation in? We're a year into the program. What are we working on this year? So we are actually building on the platform that we rolled out. We actually deployed Dell One Identity Manager, so one of the smaller, lesser-known platforms for doing identity and governance, and learning that platform and actually building upon it. We're going to continue actually deploying attestation reviews. So we're actually up to about 15 applications that we're actually doing rights reviews for in an automated fashion, about 31 attestations every quarter through the system. We've actually hit our limit at this point with the way we do things. We just do not have enough resources to actually manage this. So we've actually are pausing attestations for the remainder of the year, net new attestations, and we're going to actually look at building efficiencies into the platform. We're going to actually rework our provisioning logic to actually make sure our data is just a little bit more rock solid so we can skip steps down the path when we actually kick off an attestation review, and we can eliminate doing data checks when we do that. So to be able to get efficiencies into the platform so we can actually continue to build it out farther. We are actually going to roll out a VDS platform to actually lay the foundation for us to actually start our AD migrations. We do have quite a few LDAP-only applications in the environment, and when we actually start an AD migration, majority of the time people forget about LDAP applications when they start an AD migration, and when you pick a user up from one directory where the application is only pointing to and you move them to another directory, that application breaks. So to be able to allow seamless migration of users, we're going to lay the foundation for that with a virtual directory deployment, actually going to use Radiant Logic. We're also going to integrate that in with our ping deployment to allow us to actually utilize all the directories for everybody in a more seamless route for these migrations with our federated authentication platform. Speaking of authentication platforms, we are going to reevaluate that. We actually run several in-house today. We're going to get that down to one because they all do roughly the same thing for us, and we have a few that are really heavy, so we're going to actually streamline down to a single platform here, hopefully later this year. The last thing is we're going to actually lay the foundation for making our IAM platform the actual center of the provisioning world. Right now, our Workday implementation does a lot of provisioning outside of what we do and what we see. So they go out to all the SaaS applications and provision directly to them. They actually talk into our ticketing system and provision directly to them. We're going to actually start bringing those provisioning logic into the IAM platform so everything that a user has shows up as a resource instead of us having to go and query it. That is basically what I have. What we actually want to get to, obviously, is more of dancing in the aisles, making sure that our IAM platform is as best as we can be. As you maybe haven't noticed, there is a theme to the presentation. We are in our infancy of doing this. We've learned a lot along the way, and hopefully a lot of people don't actually have to live some of the problems that we've had down the road. So with that, I'd like to open it up to some questions. So the question was actually, who is actually our stakeholders? We did actually have HR as a stakeholder. We had our main business unit as a key stakeholder, security, and IT were all the stakeholders. I can say that HR was not enough of a stakeholder when we actually kicked this off originally. Everybody, I believe, is now involved as where they should be, but when we started, yeah, HR was the glaring hole. Yes. Our HR, the question was, does our HR department handle both employees and non-employees like contractors? And yes, they do. When we actually made the migration to Workday, all contractors, non-billable contractors, and employees are actually coming through Workday here in the United States. The only exception to that is we don't actually have all contractors in Asia yet in the platform. We will be solving that this year.
Question for you about HR. So you mentioned that they had sort of their processes didn't line up with your processes, all these codes changed kind of overnight. What kind of best practices would you say, how would you want to engage with your HR business partner earlier in the process? Jumping in the time machine, what would you have done differently?
So the question was, what would we have done differently with our HR group to actually make this a better process? It does come down to process. And use case, defining use cases, defining process logic would actually be critical. We didn't do it as well as we should have, and we have discovered a bunch of process problems along the route that we have had to solve for on the fly to actually fix problems. And that has actually been the most painful process of all this. Yes?
So is the HR system the authoritative source then? So someone coming into the organization has to go into HR, whether they're an employee, contractor?
So the question was, what is the authoritative source? Yes, Workday is the authoritative source for everything but SAM account name and employee ID, which coming out of AD and Exchange, and is actually pushed back to Workday. Yes. The question was, why was the C-level up to the board actually engaged? Because this is expensive. and to bring in some of the tools that we were looking to use, as well as the man hours that we were going to invest, that was actually a big investment. So the board actually, every meeting still talks about our IAM initiative, because we do spend a little bit of money. So why were they involved? And yes, there was an audit event. There was a specific finding that really kind of kicked this off. Yep. So the question is, what platforms do we support through this? We actually support every platform that we actually have, which includes Windows, Linux, and Mac devices on the desktop, Android and iOS devices for the mobility platforms, as well as from the server side, both Windows and Linux. We are moving into Azure and AWS, so we're actually extending into that as we speak. So the question is about our password reset platform. Our password reset platform actually is directly integrated with Active Directory. So there's questions and answers actually encoded into everybody's account. There is actually a Gina extension on the desktop, so there is a button there. It is also exposed to the internet. They're just a standard website, so people can actually get to that as well. Okay. We do. We actually have ping actually currently pointed to two Active Directory environments that make up about 95% of where all the users actually exist. Yep. Okay, so how many, so we are actually actively tracking roughly about 23,500 employees and contractors. Outside of, there are about another additional 4,000 Asia contractors that are not yet into the system. Besides that, there are overall dedicated on the team hired right now. There's myself, two engineers that work for me. We actually have 4 open headcounts. One that has been open for over a year because I can't find anybody, and then 3 that just got approved. Besides that, I actually have 2 consulting firms actually helping us. So we actually have 4 additional folks actually on site, plus remote resources.
One last question.
Yep. One more? Anybody? And specifically, SiteMinder engineering resources. Okay, well, thank you guys very much. Yep.